between Moses and the people, and that's just not what happened. Anyway, this whole situation is when Moses had the troubles of being the judge and jury for all the problems of all the people. And then his father-in-law came and said, well, why don't you just take 70 of your trusted leaders, make them the judges, let them hear the small cases, and then they bring you the big cases. And that worked out very well. Let's see here. Okay. All right. Verse 22. Okay. Another section where in verse 22, then all of you came to me. So Moses is saying to the people, you told me, let us send men ahead to spy out the land ahead of us and bring back a report. If we remember back in Numbers 13 verse 2, the Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe send one of its leaders. So once again, Moses in verse 22 is making it sound like the people had the idea to send the spies into the promised land. But actually it was God who made that direction.
Why did God do that? I'm curious.
Well, the only thing I could think of, since none of the commentaries made such a big deal out of this, is it might have been a problem in translation. Because we know that Hebrew, before King David, they didn't use vowels. They just had consonants. So you can imagine that the trouble you would have in translating from a language without vowels. Words could mean so many different things. Now, for example, if you look at verse 22, it says, all of you came to me. That could be, it could be a Trinitarian issue. Because we see in other places in the Bible where God has referenced this all. Because the three persons in the Trinity. So it could be that Moses is saying, the three persons of the Trinity came to me and said, let us send men ahead. So it could be that, hard to say, but I always find it disturbing when I have questions and I can't find a commentary that explains it. You know. So maybe I have to dig a little bit deeper. We'll see what happens. But that's another little discrepancy. Verse 23, Moses says, so that idea seemed good to me, that we should send some spies. So I selected 12 of you, one man from each tribe. Once again, we know that God is the one who gave him directions. And you can check that out in your notes. I referenced Numbers chapter 13, verse 2. You can see that it was actually God who told them. And then we get into a long section where Moses recounts the rebellion. That they didn't want to get into the promised land. They decided they weren't going to do it. And that's when God said, okay, you're going to wander around for 40 years then. That's just the way it's going to be. So as you guys read that section, did anything look odd? Did anything appear unnormal besides what we know now that's different? Okay, look to verse 37. This is where Moses blames the people for not having him go into the promised land. Because of you, the Lord became angry with me also and said, you shall not enter it either. But your assistant Joshua, son of Nun, will enter it. Encourage him because he will lead Israel to inherit it. So in chapter 4, we're going to find out a little bit more. We're going to dig into exactly why Moses isn't allowed to go into the promised land. And he can't blame the people for everything. All right. But as for you, turn around and set out towards the desert to the Red Sea. In verse 40, that's when God told the people, all right, you don't want to go to the promised land. I gave it to you. I promised you that you could just walk right in. You don't want it. So God says, you can't take the 11-day route. You're going to take the 40-year route. And he sent them to the Red Sea. Okay? Verse 14. 38 years passed from the time we left Kadesh Barnea. So 38 years of wandering plus 2 years at Mount Sinai, that accounts for the 40-year journey that they had. So it all ties out. Okay. Yeah, as you see, a lot of Deuteronomy is just a recap of what's happened. So we may not be in Deuteronomy that long. Verse 26, from the desert of Kedemoth, I sent messengers to Sihon, king of Heshbon, offering peace. Okay, we heard back in Numbers, we dealt with the concept of holy war. Now, if you guys want any of the past notes from our earlier classes, let me know and I can email them to you. Because a lot of people get confused about holy war. They look at the Old Testament and they say, well, the God of the Old Testament, he was just causing war all the time. He was wiping out people. That was a terrible God. But the God of the New Testament, oh, that's Jesus, and he's a great teacher, he's loving. It's the same God. God is God, and he's never changed. And what we see here is holy war. What happened is God would always send people to the people that lived in the land before the Israelites to warn them. And they would say, look, God is giving us this land. You need to leave. And if they wouldn't leave, that's when the war took place. So that's what we see here in verse 26, offering peace. Peace was always offered first. And another tough concept that we have is that, well, maybe they would have repented. What we have to remember is that God knows everything. God's knowledge is supreme and it's unfailing. He knows everything from the beginning of time to the end of time, and he knows it all at once. So he knows when people are going to repent and when people aren't going to repent.
He knows when COVID's going to end.
And he knows when COVID's going to end. Absolutely. Absolutely. And he tells us. He tells us in the Bible, my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways. So forget about it. You're never going to figure it out. So one of the things that I'm seeing, here's a rabbit hole, and that's kind of why I like Bible study, because we have rabbit holes. One of the things that's happening now that we can't worship in face-to-face, and we have to worship on Facebook Live or through the internet or through radio or anyway, we're finding a lot more people are attending worship that would come to church. These people would probably never ever enter in a church building, but they'll watch worship online, and they'll still get the message from God. Maybe sooner or later they'll get saved that way, and maybe they'll attend church. Who knows? Well. Melba, I wish there was a way I could just free up your camera, but I can't do that. So there's even one friend I have from Wisconsin. He attended the church that we went to a couple times, but then he stopped going. But now he's been watching worship since we've been on Facebook Live. And
our numbers last Sunday were 246.
Yeah. It's incredible. While we're doing worship on Facebook Live, we might have 45 or 60 people, But then throughout the day, as you watch it, you see 100 people watch, then 200 people watch, or maybe 300 people watch. And on Facebook, on some pastors' pages, that's the report from across the country. Pastors are doing online worship and Facebook Live, and they're getting hundreds more watching worship than they have in church. So this could be the revival. What form this takes, we have no idea. But I think we just need to keep doing this. And I met with the pastors, the Methodist pastors in the area today. We meet every Wednesday, and we all decided that even once we're allowed to worship together again, we'll probably still do Facebook Live. We'll still probably put it on our web pages, because we can still reach these people. So who knows what's going to happen. Anyway, so if you want notes from, if anything pops up, and if you have questions about anything you read in our current lessons, let me know and I'll send you those old notes. And if you don't have a printer, what I can do is we have little file folders taped to the front of the church building where we have the devotionals. I can put them in there and you guys can pick them up there. Like, for example, these posters, I printed them out and they're in the folders at the front of church. And when they disappear, I'll make more of them. This is a nice little recap of Deuteronomy, and these two young guys, they did this for the whole Bible. So they made these little posters. It's kind of cool. Nice little recap. Anyway, let's get out of that rabbit hole. So God always warned people before they would be attacked. And if they didn't repent and didn't attack, we get to verse 34. And Moses recounts what happened at that battle. At that time, we took all his towns and completely destroyed them. Men, women, and children, we left no survivors. Once again, we see that and we think how terrible this is. But what happened is these towns, they served as a sacrifice to God, because whenever the Israelites would sacrifice an animal, it would be completely destroyed. And we read that in Numbers, where the entire carcass would be burned up in some instances. So that's what happened here. The entire town was offered as a sacrifice to God.
Wasn't it true that there was one that they took the women and the children, but the men didn't?
Yep.
There was one of those towns. We talked about the numbers.
Right. And remember, in that case, they weren't supposed to do that.
Oh, that's right.
Remember? Yeah. So we see also throughout the Bible that when God tells us to do something, we need to do it. And we need to do it in its entirety, otherwise things aren't going to work out well. Thank God Jesus came, and we can make our mistakes and still be forgiven. Because if we had to keep every law, heaven would be empty and hell be overflowing. It's the way it was. Let's see, where else here? And then we get into Deuteronomy 3, the defeat of another king. The Lord said to me, "Do not be afraid of him, for I have delivered him into your hands." And the thing is, what we see throughout the early parts of the Bible, the Numbers and Deuteronomy, the Israelites, they weren't really skilled at fighting. And that's to be expected, because they spent their entire lifetime as slaves or wandering around in the desert. But they didn't really need to have any skills in fighting, because God would just give them the lands. So we shouldn't think of them as being expert fighters, because they weren't back then. Now, maybe now they are. The religious rituals of battle were more important than military training. If we look at the Battle of Jericho in Joshua chapter 6, verses 2 through 5, we see how the religious rituals were more important than any military training. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands." This was even before the battle. "Along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everybody straight in." So if imagine a military guy, if he heard this from God, he would just say, "Right, yeah, we're going to march around the city, blowing trumpets, and then on the 7th day the walls collapse and we just move in." And he wouldn't follow it. So what God is asking Joshua to do is have complete faith in me. Do this crazy thing and I'll reward you. And that's what God is asking us to do, is have faith. Have faith in what I say and it'll come out. It'll work out for you. So, pardon?
Yeah.
Yes. Right. So when we go out of the house and we glove up and then we're okay. We're going to do it. And
March around Cambridge.
yeah. There you go. So Barb's going to march around the table 7 times, and then Wilbur's going to have dinner on the table at that 7th time. See? It works. Okay. All right. Yeah. And I think the longer you're married, the more that works out. There you go. All right. So verse 6, we see another instance where they had to wipe out the whole city. "We completely destroyed them, as we had done with Sihon, king of Heshbon, destroying every city, men, women, and children." Let's see here. In the Hebrew term, destroying refers to the irrevocable giving of the entire object. So once again, just like a sacrifice, you give it over to God. Give it over to God. Oh, let's see what else here.
Wilbur was asking about plunder, right?
Yeah, and there were also rules for plunder. Let me write down a note. I'll bring that next time, because there were certain times where God would allow them to take some of the stuff from the city. But then there was an order. The soldiers got so much, the Levites got so much, and the general public got so much. So let me write that down.
I'll write it down in just a second.
Okay, I got it. So I'll send that out before next class, the rules on plunder. Because like I said, sometimes God would allow it. And if we think to back to the sacrifices, there were certain sacrifices, like the sin sacrifice, where the entire animal had to be burned up. Hide, guts, everything. And then there were other sacrifices where the whole purpose of the sacrifice was to offer a meal to the entire community. And the meal had to last at least 2 days, but never 3 days. So God wanted to make sure that there was an abundance of everything and that nobody cheated the other people in the community. So there's rules for plunder, and just as there were for rules of sacrifice. And I'll tie those two things together for next class. Let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, Moses forbidden to cross the Jordan. Once again, in verse 26, he brings up, because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. Moses has to take responsibility because in Numbers chapter 20, verses 10 through 9, God told Moses, just speak to the rock and the water would come out. But here's what they did. Then he and Aaron summoned the people to come and gather at the rock. Listen, you rebels, he shouted, must we bring you water from this rock? So there Moses is taking credit for bringing water from the rock. Then Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff, and water gushed out. So the entire community and their livestock drank their fill. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to demonstrate my holiness to the people of Israel, you will not lead them into the land I am giving you. So Moses isn't being truthful. It wasn't sure, the people had some part to play because they made Moses so angry. And we can kind of see how 40 years of buildup would have gotten him to this point. But still, Moses wasn't obedient. So he's got to take some responsibility. And that's it. That takes us through Deuteronomy 3. So next week we're going to get into the Ten Commandments, where Moses restates the Ten Commandments, and also we're going to get to probably one of my favorite parts of the Old Testament, the Shema, S-H-E-M-A, and that's the daily prayer. And as we read that prayer, you'll see how if we said that prayer on a daily basis, how it would set us up for not only a good life, but also I think we'd be able to show other people how Christian we really are. So if you want to do a little bit of pre-reading, Google Shema, S-H-E-M-A, in Deuteronomy 6, and maybe just reflect on that. I'll tell you what, I'll send you guys an email with the link, okay? So before we get to... Okay, well, no, it wasn't your fault. Melba, what I'm going to do is, next week I'm going to start the meeting, and then I'm going to send invites from the meeting, because this is the second time I've done this where we try to click on the link in the calendar and it doesn't work. Oh, okay. Well, I'll make sure I send her the notes, and we'll do it in a new way on next Wednesday. And it worked today. It'll work next week.
Okay.
Yep, I'll do it for prayer group tomorrow also. Okay? So, guys, come with your questions for next week. We're going to go through Deuteronomy 4, 5, and 6. And I'll send you guys the link for the Shema, and let's reflect on that this week. Okay? All right, good night.
Bye.
Okay.
Betsy? Your one thing, it says payment declined again, so I will put it on mine.
Are you sure?
Please, sweetie.
You can always pay us back. It's not a big deal. We know where you live.
No, just this one. No, I did it. It's done. No, don't change the other ones. It's the only one I came back on.
Okay.
Was that last one again?
Yeah, I just put it on debit.
Gotcha. It's all done.